Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the HR Tech Chat video podcast. And today I have with me a very special guest, Anita Lettink, who is the founder of HR Tech Radar and the author of a book, How to Select Your Next Payroll: The Ultimate Guide, which was published in the last year or so. Welcome, Anita. Welcome. I've only scratched the surface in terms of your background and experience, and if you would please share with the audience just some of your background and what makes you an expert in payroll.
Absolutely. Hi, Brent. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. Yeah, I'm Anita Lettink. I have a background in technology. Last 25 years, I spent in HR technology and payroll. And for 20 years, I worked at NGAHR, which is an international HR and payroll consulting and outsourcing partner. Towards the end of my employment, it was acquired by Alight. And then I thought, I'm going to fulfill a long-time dream and become an independent and work with HR tech startups and scale-ups and advise companies. And I do a lot of keynotes on the future of work, on conferences, and for in-company training.
Yeah, that's quite the background. Just as a little anecdote, I remember meeting you somehow. Did we meet in person? I don't recall. It wasn't.
We did at HR Tech conference, and I think it was the one in Chicago.
Oh, wow, yeah. And I also recall about 10 plus years ago now. We'll just ballpark it.
Yeah, but we stopped there, I think.
I was writing for HRO Today, and I was at an NorthgateArinso meeting, and that was pretty interesting. I think that was when Mike Ettling? He was there at the time.
He was one of the CEOs that we had. Yes.
Yeah. Now he's at Unit4 and all this stuff. Yeah. Really, it's a small world, and I'm so pleased to have you on the podcast because payroll is just a really let me just back up a little bit here. People from the outside looking in, they think payroll is important. It's very important.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily think, wow, it's interesting, right? And I'm just kind of channeling the sort of outside external person. It doesn't seem interesting, but man, is it interesting. It's possibly the most interesting area. Well, that might be there are many interesting areas in HCM, but it's one of the most interesting. There's a lot of fertile ground in payroll right now. Any thoughts around that? I mean, I'm not really doing it justice.
I think you absolutely nailed it, actually, because payroll is, if you do it right, everyone is like, oh yeah, of course, my payslip is correct. That is my expectation. You cannot overperform, right? It always needs to be 100% correct. But the moment that it isn't, even for a small group of people, then I would say all hell breaks loose. And all the trust that you build up and the reputation that you had is gone overnight. So it's a very difficult profession in the sense that when you do it right, no one compliments you. When something goes wrong, the phone rings and you're in the middle of it.
Yeah, it's that's a huge point. I like to say, I don't flip the switch on for the light in the morning in my office and it comes on. I say, wow, let me call up the power company and think, hey, you guys did a great job. The electricity's on today, right?
Exactly.
But if it's out, no matter the time of day, I'm on the online app, I'm on text message, I'm trying to call them up. I've been through this a couple times because we live in the sticks, but in any event, yeah, so it's a kind of in that sense, it's kind of a thankless job. That might be a little bit harsh to say, but yeah. And you know what, the other thing that is really interesting about it right now is that it's not, well, you mentioned that, all hell breaks loose if it's wrong, if it's not 100% correct. It's something we talk about here at 360 Insights. It's just a lens through which to look at HCM and payroll being, payroll sometimes owned by finance, but when it's owned by HR, we talk about concrete HCM and abstract HCM. Concrete HCM is, everything that's, having to do with efficiencies and automation and what can be reduced to or translated, to an actual number, usually a dollar amount, or a dollar amount that actually fits into an accounting spreadsheet. And when you think about it that way, payroll is really could be thought of as the most concrete aspect of HCM, because it's an actual dollar number that goes into the general ledger every pay period. But it's also the most abstract HCM being all this stuff having to do with employee experience, employee sentiment, employer culture, all these sorts of things that we know for a fact. It's kind of foolish to argue against these things being important to organizational perpetuity and success and all this kind of stuff, but it can't be whittled down to an exact number that goes into a spreadsheet because it's a future thing. And so you can't actually put it into a number that goes in a spreadsheet, and yet it's so important. And when you talk about payroll going awry, right? I mean, I can't think of a bigger employee sentiment crisis for an organization than that.
Exactly. And that was the reason that I started to write the book, because I was watching the news and reading some articles in the first months of this year. And I noticed that a lot of payroll problems hit the news, where companies moved to a new system and after go live were unable to pay people correctly. And in some cases, the result was that, of course, people could not pay their bills, had to loan money from family, or even ended up at the food bank because they had no money in the bank, especially if you live paycheck to paycheck, or if you're an hourly worker. And then the fact that you have no new income is a big problem. And so I started to look into it because I was just interested at that point. What is going on here? And at first I thought, okay, maybe there's one vendor and they don't have enough people because of the labor shortage, and so their go lives go wrong. But that wasn't the case. And then I thought, oh, so maybe it's a solution that is maybe not fit for purpose, and some people migrated onto that and they went live on it, and it's just having problems. That wasn't the case either. And the interesting thing was that this happened in the United States. I have examples in Canada, in the UK, in Ireland, in South Africa, in Finland, in a couple of places in Asia. So it was everywhere. It was everywhere. And I started to reach out to some of these people to learn what had gone wrong. And the common denominator was that early on in the process, there was a misalignment between the buyer and the vendor. And if you do not catch that early enough, simply because you don't understand each other well, you don't talk the same language, then that hits you later on, right? You make
butterfly effect. Yeah.
Right. You make assumptions about the other party doing stuff that you should do, or vice versa. And so it isn't done. And so you aren't ready by January 1st when you want to go live, or March 1st, or whenever you want to go live. But you have a burning platform, you need to go live. And so ultimately you have no other choice than run the new payroll on your new engine. And that meant that I thought that this is something that I can do, something about, because I know a lot about payroll. I know what happens in the first phases and during the sales process. And so if I can educate the buyer a little bit better, that they are prepared, that they know in advance which decisions they will have to take during the process, that will probably help everyone. It will help the buyer because they come prepared and they know what lies ahead. And it also helps the vendor because they now know that you are talking on a little bit more equal footing than you might have done previously. And I think from the responses that I got, as you mentioned, the book came out in September. This is exactly what is happening. So yeah, that's goal achieved, I would say.
That's fascinating. So you were able to determine, if I'm just sort of reiterate what you said in a different way, just so I'm getting it right. You were able to determine that a lot of these problems with payroll, they're all traceable back. A lot of them are traceable back to a certain point in time or a phase in the vendor customer relationship that's fairly early.
Yeah.
Where they don't even realize that they're misaligning, but they're misaligning, and then it just snowballs, and it turns into a big problem.
Yeah. And this is also based on my own experience while working at NGA and being involved in these sales projects. A large portion of it, especially when you're selling regional payroll or global payroll, is educating the buyer on what kind of services are you getting when you sign with an external vendor? What kind of solution are you getting? Both sides make a lot of assumptions because the vendor is so focused on, this is our service. We know exactly what we are delivering, but the buyer has worked with another vendor or they currently run their own. So their mindset is what they have. And it's never exactly the same. And unless you are very precise in defining, okay, this is what we currently have and this is what we expect you to deliver, and you match that point by point, then there's always a misconception or something that does not quite line up. And the other part of it is that buyers go out to market every 5 years, maybe every 10 years if they extend one time, right? So the experience that they have is from 5 years ago. But in the meantime, everything has changed. And if it's 10 years ago, a lot more has changed. And vendors, they sell this on a continuous base. This is their thing, right? This is their expertise. So they have an enormous knowledge advantage over the buyer. And I try to bridge that gap a little bit so that buyers are more aware of what makes a difference and how can you be successful? What are the things that you need to decide on early? What are the things that you need to ask for? What are the steps that you need to take during the process? And I don't imagine that I will completely, or that my book helps these problems completely disappear, but I hope that it brings the vendor and the buyer a little bit closer together so that they talk about the same things, and when they don't, they realize that they don't talk about the same things.
Well, awareness is incredibly important. Now, humor me for a moment. I have a little bit of a hypothesis that's sort of developing in my head while I'm listening to you, and it could be completely wrong. I don't know, but the buying process has obviously changed immensely over the past 10, 15 years, with the advent of the cloud. Some of this is, it's almost old hat to say that the cloud has taken over, but just it has. And used to be IT running the bus, with on-premises solutions. I insist on calling them on-premises, not on-premise. But anyway, this is an aside. But now we have lots of cooks in the kitchen, lots of stakeholders. On the buyer side, you have the CFO who has their own priorities. You have line of business managers, often the the internal champion, point of contact. You have, maybe employee experience council. We've seen that. Maybe an operations person, COO possibly, and all sorts of other people. Have you seen? Do you think that these problems that these issues that surface early, that they're undetected and turn into a big monster once it's deployed and you've done your first payroll? Is there more of that now than there used to be? Or is this something that sort of transcends all that, is evergreen, is perennial, and it's because of other things?
I think that why it's more visible now is, first of all, every employee that isn't being paid correctly drops it on Twitter or on LinkedIn.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So the visibility is, or Instagram or whatever, the visibility is a lot higher. So that is one. Secondly, payroll is never exactly the same. You know that, right? Yeah. Every company has their own twerks and they have these legacy policies and you need to explain them. But if they are from a couple of years ago, then maybe no one is there anymore that can explain them. And so people are not being paid correctly because no one knows anymore that there were exceptions or that there was a legacy policy. And also in many of the large companies that I have worked with, you have a procurement department, and this procurement department has a process and they run that process. Yeah. And one of the things that they do very well is negotiate the price and negotiate it as low as possible. But that comes with a consequence. And sometimes what is not clear is that the lower the price, the less movement or room to wiggle the vendor has. And at a certain point in time, you box them in so much that they hardly make a profit anymore. And that is not to say that they cannot deliver a good payroll. They really can. But with the way that you negotiate is that when you lower the price, the vendor probably takes out some services, right? And so you keep on, and so something falls along the wayside. And if there's no one that is able to say, look, you have now negotiated this out of the contract. This is a basic service. We need this. This is important because we cannot do this in-house anymore, right? And then you discover that after you go live, that is a problem. And then one of the things that I think is not helping anyone is that a lot of really good professional payroll admins are retiring. And there's no one within companies that are able or willing to take that over. Companies say, okay, so-and-so is retiring. This is the moment that we bring it all externally. And if you do that, you lose knowledge. And so if you then move from one provider to another, then it is really hard to understand what exactly you are moving because no one knows the intricacies and the details of payroll anymore. And as you know, the devil is in the details with payroll. It always is. Yeah.
I'm hearing, there's a difficulty in paying it forward in terms of legacy IP when it comes to the payroll department. I'm hearing that there's a talent pipeline problem in payroll administration right now. And what I'm also hearing is that what I'm inferring is that payroll, the people actually run payroll, need to need to step up their game. That might not be the right way to put it. They need to be very vocal during the buying process so that other stakeholders that have sort of intrinsic control over the process don't take over.
Yeah.
The procurement department, which really doesn't know much at all about actually processing payroll. What a travesty if they're sort of driving the process and the payroll leadership doesn't have strong input into that. That's what I'm hearing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In this case, you really must listen to the expert.
You mentioned that problems with issues with payroll gone wrong are more visible today, sort of in aggregate, in the macro, because of social media, and it sounds so cliche, but it's true. Your payroll goes wrong and your employee goes on Twitter and drops a nasty tweet about it, and oh gosh, your employer brand is all of a sudden starting to there's a chink in the armor right away.
Yeah.
We were talking previously online, and you mentioned demographic skills and automation being, I think I have that right, sort of a trifecta that's sort of affecting payroll, and this to me seems like a good place to pivot our conversation a little bit to talk about how the dynamics of payroll vis-a-vis the workforce. Like, how is this changing? It used to be that just for viewers, I'll just kind of give possibly a very clumsy overview, but my understanding is that we've moved beyond payroll just being this thing that that's in the background even for employees, right? It's get it right, make sure it's right, and then everybody's happy, and then nobody talks about it. We've moved beyond that, where even if it's wrong, it's kind of quiet in the background. You can take care of it. It's an internal real headache, but it doesn't necessarily get out into the wild there. But now we're in this situation where it can actually spread like a wildfire, sort of the negativity, A and B. The other side of the coin there is that payroll is becoming much more of what I've heard is that it's becoming more of an experience than a sort of a regular occurrence. Maybe you can speak to some of that.
Yeah, I think that first of all, you see a lot of different people in the workforce now. In the past, it was very much you are a full-time employee or a part-time employee, but you have a job with an employer. And what you see a little bit as a result of a pandemic, where people started to rethink their priorities, but also because people are now starting to understand that a permanent job, well, it sounds nice that you have a permanent job, but when companies have problems, especially when they have financial problems, you lose your job anyway, right? You might get some more money, but a permanent contract is not a guarantee. Yeah. And so that means that this notion of I have a permanent job, so that means I have a guaranteed income, has also suffered somewhat. And especially among younger people, I would say, you see that they are diversifying income streams. And that means they might have a job for 3, maybe 4 days a week, but that covers the basics. They pay their mortgages and food and insurance and their car payments out of that. But all the extras come from additional activities, as I would say it. So maybe they have a store on Shopify where they sell arts and crafts, or maybe they work on a startup. And so the whole notion of one employer, one income is really under pressure in a lot of situations, and especially among the workforce, I would say below 35. They have a completely different view. And then, of course, there are a lot of people that cannot make ends meet on one job, and they need 2 or 3 jobs just because of low income, and they need more jobs to cover even the basics. So you see all these variations that are putting this I have one job with one employer that gives me one income, that is really under pressure.
Interesting. And so this is transforming the very concept of what payroll is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, something else that plays into that, and that is the focus on mental health.
Okay.
And what some research has uncovered is that often mental health problems are caused by financial problems. Because if you do not know how you will pay the bills this month, and you sit at work, or you are at work and you're constantly thinking, oh, where will I get the money to pay my mortgage? Well, where will I get the money to pay my rent? You are not a productive employee because you have other things on your mind that take precedence over work. And so where in the past employers would pay people and that was it, right? You did not cross into the personal domain of an employee. You see that line disappearing with employers offering all kinds of financial education, sometimes apps. And I also see in the startups and scale-ups that I'm working with, a lot of focus on support solutions that employers can offer to employees to help them manage their money, manage their spending, maybe help them budget, and be more in control of what they earn. And the interesting thing about that is that while the employer might offer that, you can also then add the income that you get from others. So it's not only for what you earn with that one employer, you can add your one or two other income streams, which I think is because, and that gives you then a holistic picture of what you are actually making and how much you can spend.
Oh yeah. I that's making sense. You know, what I'm also hearing here is that employers, or paying, let's call them paying organizations, right? Because I think you make a good point about sort of the evolution of the ideas, especially in the younger generation, the evolution of the idea of having a permanent role. Permanent role. I prefer to call it maybe full time, because nothing's permanent. But to me, I'm hearing that paying organizations can help to mitigate some of the mental unwellness that's traceable back to financial hardship by practicing empathy, and empathy in the form of financial wellness services is one way to do that.
Yeah, I want to be careful here. What I'm not saying is mental health equals financial difficulties, because that is not the link that we can make. But what we do know is that when people have mental health issues, let's say half of that, or sometimes more than half of that, come from financial issues. But then, of course, there are also, I want to be very clear on this, very careful on this, there are also mental health issues that are completely separate from financial issues.
Yeah, thank you for adding that clarity there. I think it does, however, seem to follow that if employees are if you have what's called them contributors, not employees, right? If you're a paying organization with a contributor who is experiencing financial, clear and present financial hardship, it's going to have a direct detrimental impact on their productivity. And so in this regard, it's really cost effective for organizations to practice this empathy related to around the edges of pay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing there is that as an employer, you then actually cross over into the personal domain, where in the past, that was a line that employers did not cross, right? You pay it, and then whatever the employee does with it, that is their decision to make. And now employers start to move very carefully, very lightly, but they are stepping over that line, and they are reaching out to their people and say, hey, if this is the case for you, then let's have this conversation. I have some tools available to you. I have some education available. Can you benefit from that? And even though I think that, work is work and personal is personal, or private is private, then this is something that can actually benefit people, because when people learn to manage their money, that has a tremendous effect on their life and also on their personal well-being, right? And actually, it's something that we should learn, hopefully, in our family, like from our parents, or we should learn it in school, but we know that that isn't the case for everyone. So I think it is a benefit in many cases.
Yeah. It humanizes the organization too.
Yes.
There's a for a very long time, there's been an inclination to ignore or downplay the obvious humanness that's involved in work, right? And so, there can still be healthy boundaries between the private and the work life, but at the same time, there can be sort of a middle ground, or a little bit of just enough of an acknowledgement there. You're absolutely correct. And another thing that I'm inferring from what you're saying here is that if you're going back to the selection process and the and that whole dance between the vendor and customer at the very outset, maybe when they're still deciding between vendors, right? I'd say table stakes today, especially for some sectors of the workforce, or earned wage access, on-demand pay or streaming pay, which is something I'm seeing a little bit more of. What are some other Maybe what would you say are some other table stakes? What are some things, must-haves? If the vendor just doesn't have this, then, move on to a different vendor before you make a big mistake.
I would say do your due diligence on payroll automation. Every manual action in a payroll process has the potential to go wrong. And whenever there's a human intervention, you run the risk that it goes wrong. And so the more that a vendor has automated the process, the less need there is for human intervention. And you really want to dig deep into what they are doing, and especially what they have on the roadmap, what they have already delivered, because you and I know that a roadmap is not a guarantee to anything, right? A roadmap is a plan, but it would really it is important to look at that and see what they have already done and what they are planning to deliver. One example of that is anomaly detection. Not everyone has that yet, but it can make your life a lot easier in the DEY conversation. Do we pay people equally here?
Okay.
And how do we even know that we pay people equally? Well, with anomaly detection, you can let the program run and analyze various groups. And the moment that a certain group, there are 100 employees in a group, and they all have the same benefit except for one, then you have your anomaly. And an anomaly detection will service that one person so that you can take a look at it and understand why this person does not have this benefit, and probably correct it. And when you do, the program learns from that. So the next time that the same thing happens, the program will service the person but will immediately suggest a solution.
Mm.
And then if anomaly detection has enough experience, it can just autocorrect. If you trust it to do that, then it can just autocorrect these types of deviations that it encounters on the fly. I think this one, because with pay transparency and pay equity and equal pay, this is really a must-have, especially if you live in a country where it's mandatory to report on that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned pay transparency. You took the words out of my mouth. With diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, and but also with pay transparency, these sorts of things. Anomaly detection seems to me you've convinced me. It's definitely a must-have, and my understanding is that this comes from innovations in payroll technology like machine learning. And these sorts of things. Yeah. So there's so much to unpack there. And I'm looking at the time. And I think we're out of time. but we'll
do that next time, Brent.
Yeah, exactly. We're singing the same song. I'd love to have you again as a guest another time that we can get into some of these other things. But in the meantime, Anita, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with our audience. I think we hopefully we were able to provide some really valuable information for them today.
Thanks for having me today, Brent.
Absolutely.